Thanks, Eduardo, for
Thank you, Ernie. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. So, Eduardo has a good mix of academics and entrepreneurial world. So he has a lot of experience opening companies in different countries. So his last companies was in US. So he has a very good, interesting combination of experience of theory and practical experience. So Eduardo, feel free to introduce yourself a little bit and then start the presentation to the group. Thanks everybody again.
Thank you very much, Ernie. It's a pleasure to be here. And hi everybody. My name is Eduardo and I'm a serial entrepreneur and I've opened digital companies for the past 30 years in Brazil and the US. And I'm here to talk to you about how you run a startup. And it may sound trivial because everybody talks about startups nowadays, right? But we really have to look at startups as a new kind of company. So what is different? I mean, why would you call a startup a startup? Well, it's basically because startups are really founded on developing a product and validating a scalable business model. So what does that mean? It means you're going to reach millions and millions of people or companies with your product. So you have to scale it. You have to bring it to a large audience. And with that objective in mind, it's not a company. You know, it's not like you would open a retail store or, a gas station. It's more like you need to support something that's actually going to serve a huge audience. And that's a very different type of business. So just to get you started, we have we always talk about scalable businesses needing money, right? Startups and investors, they all come together. That's because when you go up and scale a company, you really need capital to be able to do that. You need money. So, but not every startup gets funded, gets capital to raise, and build the company. So, in fact, only 1.4% of companies get monies from angels or venture capitalist funds. The rest come from crowdfunding, friends and family, and even personal savings. So most of these startup founders and co-founders, they bring in their own money, their own investment. And rarely do they get, cash from angels or venture capitals. And as the venture proceeds, it becomes increasingly more and more, it needs increasingly more and more capital, and most of these companies get sold off along the way. Very few reach IPO, right? So 1 in 4,000 reach IPOs. Now, what you have here in the US is really a very good and large startups ecosystem. You have about 170,000 startups in the US. Brazil would have about 10,000 startups. Mexico, about 8,000. The likes of Vietnam, about 4,000. And China, coming right behind the US, has about 30,000 startups. So the US is really the very, very largest ecosystem for startups. And one of the reasons for that is venture capital funds, right? So you're going to open up a business that's going to scale to millions. You need venture capital money. Why? Because you need to do this quickly. You need to do this quickly because then you'll beat the competition, right? So venture capital and angel money in general helps you go faster, reach market faster, reach product faster, right?
So you mentioned that a lot of these companies are in US, but that doesn't mean that they are from US. A lot of these companies or entrepreneurs come from other places of the globe.
Right. A lot of them. I mean, of the 170,000, about 20% come from other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. And you're talking any part of the world. So I've met companies from Ukraine, I've met companies from Turkey, from Brazil.
But even the guys that are pretty famous today, like Zuckerberg or all these big names that we have, a lot of them are not from US, right? We mentioned Bezos yesterday.
Yes.
Cuban past,
yeah. Bezos meaning kisses.
Yeah,
in
so
Spanish,
this is not a pure American guy, right?
Right, like Steve Jobs wasn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, he was, but Syrian immigrants, right?
Mm-hmm.
The families. This is an immigrant country, so there's a lot of all these cultures coming together. It's a bit of a melting pot.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and more so in some cities than others, right? So if you're looking at San Francisco, Seattle, Boston, New York, you're looking at very diverse ecosystems where you have a lot of immigrants, and they can come from anywhere, especially from countries where they're able to migrate to the U.S. So they end up opening a company here in the U.S. and searching for market and searching for funds here as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very fertile market for that because it's very used to that. So for example, Boston is a place where you have as many startups as you have in Brazil, but with more venture capital. Here in Boston, the Boston region has more venture capital funds than the whole of Brazil. And it's not a big city in the US, right?
Yeah, some of them are going to be here to see this.
Right. So just proceeding, I mean, you have, over the life of a startup, you have this very nice growth curve that takes years and years for you to build, right? Which eventually reaches a top, and then you end up going to the stock exchange, an IPO or something, and this curve is divided in very distinct phases. In stage 1, you go to product. In stage 2, you go to market, and then you find traction, and then finally you start to scale. And as you proceed this journey, right, your company is worth more and more and more. And this is how the average valuations work according to phases in the US. And this is very different in Brazil. So in the US, you have these very defined moments when a valuation of a company, meaning the worth of a company to its investors and to the market, right, changes, right? So it changes when you finally go from product, you're going to market, your company is already worth more. Now, if you go to market and then you find some real traction, meaning you've got clients that are willing to pay you and you've got $1 million plus revenue and you keep growing, then you're finally going to scale and then you're suddenly worth more and more. This is the whole bet of the market, that you can create value from, a couple of guys in a garage.
Exactly.
Or from well-known students, like Sergey Brin and Larry Page in Google, right? They were from Stanford. And these guys...
Another example of immigrants, right?
Well, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But these were very high-ranking students. They had PhDs. So, I mean, Stanford helped a lot. So it depends a lot on what type of startup you want to open, right? I don't think you're going to want to, compete with Google anytime soon, right? Well, it's anybody's guess. So these startups, they tend to pivot a lot. I mean, most of the startups pivot at least once during their journeys. And every single startup that I know has pivoted. Even Facebook has pivoted, right? So it's my understanding, and this is the market, right, that these ecosystems, they're all based on local content, local talent, local systems. So Boston is a huge system here in the US, as is San Francisco. Austin in Texas is growing tremendously. You have New York with fintech growing very immensely, Seattle. There's a lot of cities in the US that have this potential to fund startups and make them grow, because there's a lot of talent. But also in Brazil, right? You have São Paulo, Belo Horizonte, Rio de Janeiro, and even Brasilia is coming up with a lot of startups nowadays. I mean, Recife, there's a lot of places in Brazil that really have it, making good strides in building companies and making them, global phenomenons.
So, Eduardo, just one thing. For the audience that we have, some are entrepreneurs, some want to open their business. So maybe they're not too familiar with some terms. Can you explain a little bit more about what's the meaning of pivot?
All right. So what happens is you open up a business and suddenly you see that you're not going to get $1 million in revenue. You're not going to get traction. So you've launched the product, but things are taking a while to move along, and you feel that you're not going to reach your targets for the next race, for the next round. You're not going to reach scale. So if you're not going to reach scale, what are you doing? You open this up to be a startup. You can either decide to keep the business and make it your lifestyle business, as we call it.
And that's okay, right?
Obviously. I mean, who minds, opening up a lifestyle business?
Mm-hmm.
The issue is, lifestyle businesses, they tend to be cyclical, meaning that you're going to last with the lifestyle businesses from 5 to 10 years on average. And that's great. But in fact, what you really need is to be able to scale. That was your mission from the start, right? You opened up a startup. You didn't open up a company. You're not opening a bakery, right? Mm-hmm. So these guys, they're young, right? They can scale. But even if they're not young, they'll, instead of scaling and I'm not going to reach scale, they pivot. Mm-hmm. So as they pivot, they change their business model. So I'll give you an example. When Airbnb decided to open up their, rental business for a mattress. I mean, they had an air mattress, for Christ's sake, right? They rented the room for an air mattress. They decided that the business wasn't in renting the room, right, of somebody they know. It was in renting a room of a stranger. So anybody could come in. So that the big advantage and the big pivot that Airbnb did was that anybody could enroll as a guest house. That wasn't common before, right? You had people going to Craigslist and offering their house as a guest house, but nobody was doing this as a business, right? Airbnb decided to, even though you don't have an account with us, you can just enroll and offer your guest house. And that was really something. I mean, they really made a shift. It took them a while, but that pivot really made them very famous. So, but they were in the right system, right? They were close to San Francisco. And that ecosystem really pumped up, a lot of dollars into their business, which allowed them to scale. So besides the local business, you have a lot of cities that, have all these wonderful ecosystems. Besides Silicon Valley, you have there London, Beijing, Sao Paulo, Stockholm, Seattle, Washington. You have a lot of those that are very proficient in many ways. And these businesses, they need to start with the correct type of ecosystem, right? So finding out who you're going to do your mentorship with, who you're going to accelerate with, who you're going to have as the initial investors. And the things that matter the most really are your first clients. I mean, if you have the right first clients, I bet you're going to be successful, even with a lifestyle business. So, because the first clients drive the business, right? And these ecosystems and these cities that I talked to you about, they're ripe for innovation because they have clients there that are willing to try out new products. And that's fundamental for a startup, right? Okay. Now, what about, so if the objective is to scale, then we need to build the startup. We need to build not only the product, right? We need to build a category. We need to define our category. So during the product phase, we need to be able to define the category in which we win. So Airbnb came up with the idea of defining the category as renting guest houses for their members, right? But Uber decided to rent cars from their drivers, rent with drivers, right? So they were redefining the transportation mode, taxis transportation mode. They were going to disrupt that. Now, for example, if you take the likes of Amazon, they were there to displace the retailers from the start, right? They didn't care. They were redefining the shopping experience. And that was their goal, right? We're going to scale by redefining the shopping experience. And all that's fine, as long as you keep clear what it is that you're going to do and how you're going to differentiate yourself. But you have to define your category. You have to be good at something, right? And that something needs to exist in the mind of the user. Because creating a new category can be done as well. It's much more difficult. But most of these startups redefine a category. And after you define a category, you have to build a product. Build a product and try it out with a couple of clients. Not launch the product right off and make it available over the internet or whatever. Test it with a few clients. Then you go to minimum viable product and launch the product. Once you launch the product, you're kind of doing a model, what we call a product market fit, and then you can try to do some, minimum viable repeatability tests, maybe get some traction, and then you're ready to go to scale. But all this takes 4 to 5 years. It's slow work, it's painful work. And really, all these phases are well defined in many books. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this. And there's a lot of tasks that you need to perform. But the main task that you need to perform, once you reach that initial product release, is to be able to keep your metrics very accurate. Because investors nowadays are very, very savvy regarding data. And all of these startups, they have basically 4 pillars. And that's the 4 pillars they use to build the company with. They have a product pillar, building the product, and each of these phases, you have needs that need to be tended to for the product of the startup. You have a revenue streams which you need to build and acquire clients, channels that you need to go through. You also have teams, meaning that you're going to have more than just a founder and a co-founder, right? You're going to have people that support you, the first employees that support the business. You're going to have to build a team. You can't do everything alone. And investors don't like it when somebody presents themselves as a single person. So you have to find a co-founder. Normally it's a team of 2 and 3 at the beginning that grows slowly but steadily, but you have to choose the right people. Just as important as having the first clients, it's having the first employees, get them right. And that takes a while.
So you're talking about product here, and I'm sure that some Uninter students have already a business and they have a product, but some are struggling with the idea. In your experience, any tip on how you can help these students in terms of how to come up with a good idea?
Sure. There are a couple of things you can do. First is, if you have an idea of a business and you want to try it out, nowadays it's actually cheaper than ever to try stuff out. There are a number of sites that allow you to test ideas with consumers. Sites that are going to charge you, $100 for you to test it with 200 consumers. It's a freemium version, paid freemium version kind of thing.
Or you can try with consumers yourself, right?
You can. The hard part is getting it right.
Exactly.
So
the volume.
The volume, yeah. So if you try it with your mom and dad, or if you try it with...
Yeah, but they're not clients.
They're not clients.
You should try it with clients.
You should try it with people that don't know you, don't know your product. And at a quantity that you can actually statistically say that the product is, the idea is valid. There's demand for the idea. You solve a pain point, right?
Yeah, in the last webinar, Eduardo, we said that every time that you're talking with a client and the client will make this sound, there is opportunity there. So solving the pain, like you mentioned, is a good way to...
Exactly, alleviate them of the perils of life. Yeah.
Thanks.
So, going forward, you also have the systems pillar, right? A company does not exist without systems in place. You need to do payroll, you need to control cash, you need to be able to service clients, customer service. So there's a lot of these systems that need to be put in place for the company to be able to scale. So I'll take, for example, a company here in the area of Boston, HubSpot. HubSpot had already started to scale violently a couple of years ago. They had 800 employees. Well, today, they have 20,000 employees. Now, can you imagine that? Going from, almost 1,000 to 20,000? These guys were hiring 1,000 people per month. How do you organize that? So being able to scale means that you need systems in place to be able to do that. And there's some pillars that, and the drivers of those pillars are well known. And these drivers always talk about cost. You have to keep costs down. You have to be able to understand the data. The data has to be, you have to be proficient in data to be able to sell, to understand what's going on. You have to be at the right ecosystem, and you have to have funding. But most of all, you need to be able to be a good learner. You need to be able to listen and take in some hard lessons sometimes. And you need to be able to be open to that. And that openness is going to drive the business, because you do not know everything. Nobody does. You need to be able to learn. Well, especially earning. Well, within the journey, there's also the possibility, as we mentioned before, that this business won't scale. It's a lifestyle business. So you can see the line to the right there, lifestyle. But if you do it right, maybe you can become viable. So viable is what happens to most of the startup companies that make it through the first phases. And that viable, in the case of Brazil, can be a very good amount, as in the case of the US, right? So the chance here is for you to build a company that's actually going to be bought. You have to have an exit strategy. Exit strategies meaning that you're going to sell your company. You're not going to keep it forever. But you have to be able to know who the target is and turn it into something that target company wants to acquire.
Brazilian, they use WhatsApp a lot, and WhatsApp was a company that was viable.
Right.
They made a lot of money from the social.
Exactly. Yeah, to Facebook, right? I mean, Instagram made it big as well. Well, so there's a lot of numbers attached to this, and the numbers are very significant. And you guys should know that these numbers are things that the investors look for. How many employees you have in each phase, what type of money you're spending in each phase, what kind of percentage you're spending in G&A, R&D, and so on. These are very, very powerful tools that you can use to be able to see if you're on track. Well, besides all this, and Ernie knows this, and he knows a lot about acquiring customers because he does this for a living. It's not always the easy road. I mean, sales normally is what's hard about startups is not building a product, it's actually selling it.
And actually, that's one of the skills that entrepreneurs must have, right, Eduardo?
Right. And selling is an art. I mean, but if you have marketing support and you know what you're doing, it's much easier, right? So the three functions of startup marketing, you've probably heard about what outbound marketing sales, inbound marketing sales, growth hacking. Well, these are all marketing functions within a startup, right? Growth hacking appeared after 2012 with Andrew Shen and Sean Ellis. So growth hacking is really where the news is. I mean, growth hacking is very data driven, very small budgets, testing exhaustively, and all this testing leads you to a flow that doesn't qualify the functions as vertical. It leads you to a flow that qualifies them as a movement from marketing qualified leads to sale qualified leads to product qualified leads, and eventually, if you're big enough and the client is big enough, account-based marketing. Now, all these functions are within the startup, right? It's very interesting to see that all these channels lead to a conversion that leads to active customers, that leads to loyal customers. And most of the successful companies actually use a lot of product qualified leads, like Facebook, for example, with its social network, right? It actually led the growth for Instagram, it led the growth for WhatsApp through this product qualified lead approach. Now, how do you do that, right? What kind of methodology you use? Well, you basically use design thinking, lean, and agile. And the companies that have been using these for a lot of years have come to realize that these are very new methodologies, but also very efficient methodologies, because the world keeps changing. So you need to have something that really does change with how the world is changing. So both design thinking, which is basically seeing yourself through the eyes of the buyer, and constantly iterating so that you can actually have a change in priorities without affecting your delivery, product delivery, and or sales delivery, is a very fundamental technique that startup owners must acquire. And some of these companies that you're seeing here on, they're very different startups. You can have a technology-first company, which requires persistence, like Slack and Bird. Bird is, one of those scooter, right? Electric scooter companies, very good scooter company. Business model first companies like Uber and Airbnb, you require speed because you have to be fast to go to market. Customer first startups, they need endurance, right? They need to, Amazon had 15 years of really, really big losses every year just building the business. And these are all possible, right? Startup processes. Technology is the hardest because customer first and business model first are easier, but you have to know if you're a marathon runner, a maze runner, or if you're a sprinter. And then you choose how you're going to start the journey, right? Mm-hmm. By offering technology, something that customers want, or by offering an innovative business model. So that's it for us. We have a lot more. Come and join the fun, and we're here to learn. Thank you, guys.
Good. I think we have some questions coming from the audience. First one that came is now a good time to create a business?
Yesterday is the best time to create a business. But today is what we can do. So.
And one thing that you mentioned, Eduardo, and it would be interesting if you could explain a little bit more. Things that you can do today with $1,000 is different than things that you could do 10, 20 years ago in terms of starting a company.
Yeah, that's
right?
true.
Can you give us a little bit more information about that and some examples that people can say, yeah, that I can do, right?
So this is both an opportunity and a risk, right? The opportunity is it's never been cheaper to open up a business. You can do stuff quicker, cheaper, online, even with great quality, mm-hmm. with little money. Mm-hmm. But if you can do it,
a lot of people can.
Mm-hmm. And I've been told again and again that startup is a rich boy's business. And it doesn't have to be. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of opportunity out there to innovate. So some very low impact startups are open every day. High impact startups with social impact are very hard to find. Mm-hmm. But they're, in fact, the ones that can make a difference. Mm-hmm. So even small things make a huge difference. Mm-hmm. And it's never been cheaper to do that.
Mm-hmm. So the second question that came is, how much money do we need to start a blockchain startup? Good luck with that.
Well, so there's a lot of blockchain businesses, different types of blockchain businesses. So you could have an ICO, for example, an initial coin offering, and build your own token with your own cryptocurrency kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And doing that requires a lot of business because you need to find the investors, but you also need to find who will actually use your token. So with your ICO kind of thing, your token, you're always stuck between having a two-sided marketplace kind of thing. The ones that buy into the token and the ones that sell you into the token, right? Mm-hmm. And that is a very expensive business model, mm-hmm. as Amazon will show, right? Mm-hmm. It's nothing to do with the blockchain. It's to do with the cryptocurrency that mm-hmm. Is the problem. If it's just a pure blockchain business, and then you can have a blockchain service company, building a blockchain has never been easier. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of blockchain technology out there, like Solidity from Ethereum Foundation. You can actually build smart contracts and have your own product be part of a ledger, right? Mm-hmm. But you have also other types of blockchains. For example, IBM, put together a blockchain just for companies to use that has a different consensus system.
Mhm.
This is much easier to implement. So I would say that if you have $10,000, $10,000, you can open a blockchain business.
Thank you. Another one that came, should they start a company local or global?
There's no such thing as local, at least not in the internet. I mean, you can. Yeah, so for example, Uber is local. It started in Chicago. It had to start somewhere, but it's geographically fenced, right? Meaning, going around the town, you need a town, right? Mm-hmm. So Chicago was the local scenery for that startup. Mm-hmm. But it quickly became apparent to the Uber founders that they needed to expand because they had a startup and going to the next city, then the next, and then they became a global business. So you have to start up with a global mentality, even if you just use your own local scenery as a start.
There's another question here. It comes from a participant that is a consultant in an engineering company. They're a small company and they do very specific activities. And the question is, does any kind of business could evolve into a startup?
Sure. So here's the thing. Take, for example, a famous company in Brazil, pick any. They decide to go to the US. In the US, they're a kind of startup, if they want to go big about it, right? So we have a lot of companies here in Boston that come from other parts of the world. And these companies, once they reach the US, they need to repaginate. They need to rethink how their product works because they're talking to a different culture, right? The Americans are slightly different than the Brazilians, as you might have noticed. They need to rethink pricing. They need to rethink how to go to market. So in fact, they're a startup. I mean, they're having to rethink all these variables. So yes, we have actually quite a bit of clients here at the IEC that are exactly in that position, right? They decided to expand to the US. They're a medium to big company in Brazil. Once they arrive here, they need to rethink.
And the last one, and I would like to know your opinion about that, is thinking small or thinking big is the same amount of work.
Right.
Do you believe that? So you're asking that in a different way. To start a small company or start a startup that will be a big company probably will be the same amount of work. Is that true?
At the very beginning, it's true. It quickly becomes very different because, I mean, so say you're going to open a boutique, a fashion retail store. If you open a fashion retail store, you go into the same problems that
It'll be a lot of work.
A lot of work at the beginning. But once you get within that cruising speed, you're more or less set. You got your suppliers set up, you got your clients set up, You're not going to multiply by 1,000 the store. You don't want that. But a startup, that's all it wants. So suddenly, it's all to do with how can I multiply this by 1,000? And then, where you had one problem, you suddenly have close to 1,000.
But then you have people to help. Right?
Yeah, and money, right?
So, thank you, Ed. Well, very good seminar. So, everybody, thanks for your time. That was the third seminar that we did. Again, that's part of the webinars that we're doing for the program Entrepreneurship and Innovation.